If you ask 100 people who their favorite character from Demon Slayer is, odds are the majority of them are gonna say Tanjiro or Nezuko or Inosuke or Zenitsu, one of the main four, which makes sense. Those are the people you spend the most time with in Demon Slayer. But there might be an additional name present that may confuse you a little bit, because this is a character who spends a very little amount of time in the manga being shown relative to the main four, and that person is Rengoku. You see, Rengoku is an absolute crowd favorite, the epitome of the best boy, who only spent, 12 episodes with us in the anime, if you consider the Mugen Train as episodes and not as a movie, and yet in that small amount of time managed to encapsulate so many people's hearts that he became many people's favorite character, making his fate at the end of the Mugen arc all that more traumatic. But here's the thing, just because he's your favorite character doesn't necessarily mean you know as much about him as you think you might. You see, Rengoku is a great character, and while he doesn't get a lot of shine in the manga/anime, he has many different spin-offs about him. You see, because he's not only your favorite, he's also the mangaka's favorite. So much so that he has a spin-off manga called Rengoku Gaiden and a special one-shot chapter called Special One Shot. All things that help us understand Rengoku more as a character, and all things that I've read. So let's crack into our first ever non-Naruto You Know Nothing about Rengoku. Before we get to cracking into anything though, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're feeling particularly saucy, go ahead and hit that join button and become a member of the Weeb Alliance over here on YouTube. Get access to 3 additional videos from me a month, and badges and emotes and member shoutouts at the end of every video. But of course, if that's not something you're financially comfortable with at the moment, just remember I'm just happy you're here right now. So Rengoku, the loudmouth, fiery hair flame pillar. To the casual observer, he may seem like a very simple character. He's a Gon, he's a Yuji, he's a Naruto, a man with indomitable will who will do anything to save his friends loudly. And while I'm not saying that those characters I just listed aren't complicated in their own rights, because they absolutely are, Rengoku is nothing like that. Rengoku is actually one of the more complex and deeper characters in the entirety of Demon Slayer. With a backstory so fleshed out, I can make a video about it. So what drove him? How did he become a Demon Slayer? How did he end up on the Mugen Train? And what was his life's purpose? And hey, if we got the time, what were his abilities? Well, let's start these videos in the way that we always start these videos. At the beginning, Rengoku is the oldest son of the previous flame pillar, Shinjiro Rengoku. For the sake of not confusing a bunch of Rengokus, I'm going to start referring to Rengoku as Kyodro. Shinjiro, the previous flame Hashira, was actually a pretty good dad and spent the majority of Kyodro's childhood training him in swordsmanship with his younger brother, Senjuro. And for a while, everything was really good in the Rengoku household. Kyodro referred to Shinjiro as a very passionate father during this time period, who would fervently take up missions to kill demons because it was his job as the flame Hashira. And Shinjiro was the flame Hashira for decades. And as the flame Hashira, he was incredibly talented and therefore was never truly challenged, as in died in a fight with a demon. Because of this, he was able to uphold his duty for a very long time. That was unfortunately until his wife died. You see, Ruka, Kyodoro's mother, was a very stern yet compassionate woman. While sometimes it may have seemed like she was being very cold to Kyodoro, she was using it as a way to get compassion into him. Essentially, Ruka wanted to grill into Kyodoro that the strong, like him, were meant to protect the weak, and that the strong were never to use their strength for selfish gain. And this rung true to Rengoku on account of the fact that his mother was one of the weak she was talking about. Notoriously sickly, she served as a dichotomy in their own family. On one hand, you had Rengoku's father, a literal flame pillar, standing ardently to protect those around him who are weak. While on the other hand, you had his children and his wife, who were the very ones being protected. So naturally, you would assume that Rengoku would be more like his father, one of the strong, than like his mother, one of the weak. But that's actually not the situation. In fact, it was his mother herself that said she was so grateful to have a son who was both strong and kind and compassionate. A son who would always try to protect others, not because he wanted praise, but because he knew it was the right thing for him to do as one of the strong. Which is why when she died, it became Rengoku's life mission to uphold the very thing that she wanted from him. And ironically, her death became a passing of torches moment. You see, her death destroyed Rengoku's father. The anime and the manga don't give us an incredible dive into the descent that Shinjiro goes through after the death of Ruka. We just know more or less after she dies, he retires from the Demon Slayer Corps and starts to drink. But it's actually in Rengoku Gaiden that we get a better view into this exact time period. Essentially, we find out that after the death of Ruka, Shinjiro is still the Flame Hashira. He doesn't retire immediately. However, he no longer takes on missions, and he drinks while on duty, essentially retiring without actually filing the paperwork. And it's when all of the Hashira are called to meet for the first time in 6 months that Shinjiro finally states he will not be going, effectively retiring. But it's not just the passing of hands. Shinjiro, in his depression, becomes dismissive and abusive of Rengoku and Senjiro. He stopped training both of them in flame breathing, but that doesn't stop Rengoku. In fact, Rengoku says, okay, fine, if you're not going to train me, I'll teach myself. And Rengoku finds the 3 volumes of books that they have on flame breathing in their house, reads them, and teaches himself flame breathing. Because you have to realize there is nothing more counter to the dream of Ruka, Rengoku's mother, than giving up on protecting the weak. And that is exactly what Shinjiro did. So Rengoku, wanting to be the person who actually lives for his mother's dream, took it upon himself to get as strong as possible. Now, unfortunately, this wasn't the case for everybody in Rengoku's family. Senjiro, Rengoku's little brother, had less talent for sword work than Rengoku did. Not to mention, he was also, like Rengoku, being discouraged by Shinjiro. These two things, in combination with the fact that Shinjiro was no longer training them, made Senjiro put down the sword, which puts even more pressure on Rengoku to be the one to pick it up. While there was at one point in Rengoku's life 3 possible people who could have been Flame Pillar-esque in their ability to protect those around them, he was now the last left, meaning he would have to pick up their slack, which is more likely than not why he decided to start training others in flame breathing. If Shinjiro wasn't going to pass on the power of flame breathing, Rengoku would have to do it himself, which is where Mitsuri comes into play. And I know what you're saying, but Mitsuri uses love breathing, and you're right, she does. Well, we actually learned in Rengoku Gaiden that she was trained in flame breathing before she made the switch to love breathing. And this is most likely due to her insane strength and flexibility, which wouldn't necessarily jive with flame breathing, which is mostly based off kendo-like movements of one big sword strikes. But regardless, this backstory and consideration makes sense as to why Rengoku was so willing to have people train under him. Because his entire life, those who he thought were going to be beside him to help him protect the weak kept disappearing. So he had to bolster his own ranks. But we actually still have a long way to go until we're talking about Rengoku overtaking the Flame Pillar position, or even until we talk about him training Mitsuri. Because the special one-shot chapter that was released right before the release of Mugen Train the movie gave us insight into Rengoku's first ever mission as a Demon Slayer. And obviously this was released to give us a little bit of backstory on Rengoku, who would play a large part in Mugen Train. But this special one-shot, though it is very short, actually gives us an incredible glance into who Rengoku is as a person and what kept him that way. The chapter opens with Rengoku heading out on his first ever mission, but Shinjiro, his father, telling him he will be the last ever Flame Pillar. Now, this is very significant because for as long as there has been Demon Slayers, there has been a Flame Pillar. But Shinjiro tells Rengoku that both him and Senjiro have no talent and therefore will not take his position. This statement casts Rengoku into an introspective state, where he asks the question, does somebody's skill have to be acknowledged in order for them to pursue their dream? Or can hard work, sweat, blood, and tears make up for that lack of skill in order to complete that dream without the consent of everybody around them? Essentially, Rengoku is posing the question, is natural talent necessary in order to strive for one's dreams? Or does will and hard work count enough? And while he's doing this look inwards, his little brother Senjiro runs up to him and says he's so proud of him and how he wants to be just like him. Because mind you, this was Rengoku's first mission. While his mother was dead, Senjiro was still training. But Rengoku simply hearing Senjiro say that he wants to be like him casts him into a memory of a boy he knew during his exam. You know, the demon exam where they throw a bunch of kids into a forest filled with demons and hope some of them get out alive? Only 3 people his year survived, and one was a boy who held a broken Nichiren katana and was shaking, covered in blood, and told Rengoku he wanted to be just like him. And while Rengoku was usually steadfast in his confidence and his loudness, he struggled to say, okay, let's work together. Because in his core, Rengoku saw that this child barely survived. And yet, while they were the same age, he had fear that one day the demons would take him. And the hesitation in his voice made him think of his father, and how there's a possibility that his father is only cold with him and Senjiro in order to distance himself from the pain of losing them one day. Problem was, Rengoku was going to be faced with losing those close to him much faster than his father would. On his very first mission, Rengoku was being sent as reinforcements to kill a flute demon, a demon whose blood art ability was flute manipulation. Essentially, this demon could play a flute and it would mix up your nerve signaling. Try to move your hand, then your foot moves. Try to move your head, then your body moves. And if that doesn't work, the demon then could create wolves out of this flute that would pounce and attack and kill you. The demon was, for all intents and purposes, terrifyingly strong. So strong that when Rengoku arrived on the scene, 9 demon slayers and 5 children had been murdered. And amongst those demon slayers was the boy he was afraid would die. Rengoku charged at the flute demon and let off a strike of flame, but the flute demon jumped it and began to play its flute. Specifically, began to play the song that would mess with Rengoku's nerve signaling. But it was at that point that Rengoku slapped his ears. You see, the flute demon thought that Rengoku was covering his ears, but he wasn't doing that, because covering your ears would imply you can't swing your sword and leave him at a distinct disadvantage. But it's in that moment that the flute demon sends the wolves to attack Rengoku, who, as he covers his ears, is staring upon the bodies of his peers. His peers who had fought to protect those the flute demon was terrorizing. His peers who he considered precious in their single-minded determination to protect the weak. His peers who had signaled to him using sign language as they lied dying about the flute demon's abilities. And that's why when Rengoku was supposedly covering his ears, he was actually rupturing his eardrums. And now, deafened temporarily, Rengoku was able to cut off the flute demon's head. You see, this moment reinforced everything Rengoku knew about himself already. In this very moment, he saw the valor of those who fight for the weak, the determination of the strong, even if felled, to save lives. And because of the determination of those who died, giving Rengoku hand signs, a child on the battlefield was saved. And as Rengoku gathered the bodies of his comrades so that they would be together as they walked through the next plane into the afterlife, he told them, "One day I will be admirable like you." You see, while Rengoku wears the guise of somebody who's not serious and overly loud and over the top, in his core, this moment solidified that there was nothing more honorable than dying for the weak. And as Rengoku continued on with his Demon Slayer career, this was only more solidified to him. Because fundamentally, this is who Rengoku was supposed to be. Somebody who would go outside of the box at the cost of their own health to protect those that they may not even know but need protecting. Going as far as to smile for the child that he just saved while temporarily being deaf. But this mission also gives us a bit more understanding as to why Rengoku hates demons so much. Demons who laugh in the face of those who he finds honorable. Demons who actively impose their will upon the weak. Every demon he has met in his life has stood diametrically opposed to what he stood for. And this was no different than the demon he had to fight in Rengoku Gaiden. You see, Rengoku Gaiden opens with Rengoku training with Mitsuri, trying to bolster the numbers of people who know flame breathing to continue on one of the strongest breathing forms to protect the weak. And it's at that moment while they're training that all of the pillars are summoned. Shinjiro says he doesn't want to go, so Rengoku goes in his stead. But upon showing up there, the other 8 pillars are confused as to why Shinjiro isn't there. So Rengoku has to explain that he has turned to the bottle and no longer does the duties of a flame pillar. That's fine, because once Rengoku becomes a flame pillar, Shinjiro will be rejuvenated. Sanemi doesn't take well to this. Surprise. But instead of shooting Rengoku down, Kaguya-sama, the head of the Demon Slayers, says,
"Well, you know how to become a member of the Hashira. You have to kill one of the 12 Kizuki."
Unfortunately for you, we got one kind of running wild right now. I forgot to mention a relatively important plot point. When Sanemi is attacking Rengoku simply for saying he wants to be a pillar, and when I say attacking, I mean punching in the face, Rengoku stops his fist but doesn't swing back. Sanemi asks why he's not fighting back, and Rengoku responds that swordsmen aren't supposed to fight amongst each other and that he would never hit a human. You see, out of all of the pillars, Rengoku had the most traditional set of values. And after he wiped some of the blood off his face from Sanemi punching him in the face, Rengoku was on his way to kill one of the Kizuki. But people expressed doubt to Kaguya-sama. I mean, this was a Kinoue, and they were saying that he should kill one of the Kizuki. But Kaguya-sama assured all of them that this wasn't an intuition, this was confirmation. Kaguya-sama had an idea that Rengoku would change the Demon Slayer corpse forever. So Rengoku takes a group of Demon Slayers to Tokyo, including Mitsuri, in order to find this Kizuki. And while they're looking for this demon, Mitsuri accidentally trips a child, and the child begins to cry. Mitsuri then tries to soothe the child, but because she has weird hair and a sword, the child's mother thinks she's a kidnapper. It's at that point that Rengoku has to come in and kind of save the day. He cheers up the child and makes a joke about his own hair in order to soothe the fears of the mother. And this is a very good view into Rengoku as a person. Even while on a mission looking for a deadly demon, he makes sure that those around him leave with a smile by wearing one of his own. Because Rengoku finds true strength is a smile. It's one of the few things that people can't take from you. And therefore he tries to wear one as often as possible to confer his idea of strength. And after he gets done cheering up the child and making sure the mom is all right, an explosion goes off. And as Mitsuri rushes to the explosion to help, Rengoku stops her. And as he stops her, a bullet whizzes by her face. It's at this point that we see the demon Hyro, who is sitting on top of a tall building trying to snipe Rengoku. But before he can even cock his second bullet, Rengoku is on top of the building with him, slicing his arms off. Hyro is Lower Moon number 2. It's at this point that Rengoku expresses his disgust with Hyro, using an indiscriminate attack like the explosion that hurts innocents. And it's at this point that Rengoku's smile fades. And as Rengoku stands across from Hyro, Hyro begins to prattle on about how he's been training for years to avenge himself against Rengoku, to which Rengoku asks, "Who are you?" It's kind of a Kisame Mike Guy situation. This pisses Hyro off so much that he shoots himself in the head. That's how he gets himself to calm down. He's a demon, he can do that. And as Hyro is calming himself down, another explosion goes off behind Rengoku. And Hyro uses this as an opportunity to pull guns out of his shadows. You see, Hyro's ability is Umbra Kinesis, the ability to control shadows. And he can treat these shadows as pockets of dimensional space where he can store whatever he wants, which is usually guns. So he pulls out dozens of guns and shoots them at Rengoku. Rengoku deflects all of the bullets because he's just that fast and dashes for cover. But there are shadows in the cover too, and more guns appear and shoot at Rengoku. Rengoku jumps away from the guns and goes to slice Hyro's neck, but there's shadows on Hyro's neck, which he uses to stop the blade. See, control over the shadows also allows Hyro to control the texture of the shadows, and his texture is sticky. Therefore, Rengoku's blade sticks to his neck, and there Rengoku is stuck, and Hyro sets off an explosion. An explosion that, mind you, cuts Hyro in half. And as he's rejuvenating, Mitsuri rushes to the scene of the explosion, where she's jumped by Hyro. Hyro puts her down on the ground with a boot on her forehead and a gun to her temple, and states that he will torture her to death in front of Rengoku for revenge. But Rengoku wasn't killed by the explosion, and once again, he slashes Hyro's neck. He doesn't decapitate him. It's at this point that Hyro taunts Rengoku and says,
"My neck is almost uncuttable.
Your sword will never trump my gun," just like how a human will never trump a demon. And as he hears this, he's brought back to a memory from his mother, where she tells him that his family have been flame pillars for generations, and that all flame pillars have a flame inside of their soul. And that flame inside of their soul is meant for one thing and one thing only: burning demons to a crisp and shining light upon your people. You see, this is an incredible reminder and a parallel to the moment that Rengoku has with Akaza, that his mother is the central driving force in his personality, and that personality is a flame that can both kill and defend. Sorry, it's a new day. Demon Slayer videos take me a bit longer to make because there's not as good comprehensive articles to read about these kinds of people to flesh out my videos with important information. So I have to just go back and reread the manga in its entirety. But regardless, there Rengoku stands face to face with Hyro, a demon whose neck he may not be able to cut. And it's at that point that Hyro shows Rengoku another one of his abilities: Shadow Wolf. Yeah, wolves are kind of a thing with Rengoku. We don't really know why. Flute Demon pulled out wolves, Hyro pulled out wolves. Probably like some symbolism in there, but not that I can pick up on. Regardless, Rengoku dispatches of the wolves, but this sends Hyro into a memory flash of the time that he fought Shinjiro Rengoku's father. Rengoku's father, while he was still carrying out the duties of a flame Hashira after the death of Ruka, had bumped into Hiro and sliced him to pieces while making fun of him for wanting to run away from him, essentially ridiculing him for his cowardice. But since Shinjiro and Rengoku look very similar, Hiro thinks that Rengoku is Shinjiro, and that's why he wants revenge, and that's why Rengoku doesn't know who he is. But in order to snap himself out of this bad memory cycle, he shoots himself in the head. And it's at that point that Rengoku decides to capitalize and closes the distance, but Hiro pulls out a minigun from his shadows. Not like a traditional minigun like you may be thinking, it's one of the gravity-fed ones from World War I, the ones you had to crank, regardless a minigun. And for some reason, this sends Rengoku into a memory flash of his childhood, specifically Senjiro asking him if his father will leave one day like his mother did. But it's at this point that Rengoku assures Senjiro that his father will pick himself back up again. But in his heart of hearts, I don't believe Rengoku believes this, because as he tells Senjiro that he thinks to himself that as the firstborn son of the Rengoku family, it is his burden to pick up the slack his father is given. He tells himself not to cry and that nobody can stay in this world for eternity, but with the time that he's been given here, he will protect the weak like he promised his mother he would. It's at this point that Mitsuri kind of gets her own side story. Essentially, she's searching for bombs around the city and defusing them, and then her sword gets stuck in one of the wolves and she's like, oh no, I can't cut through it. But then she sees the little boy that tripped over her earlier and his mother, and she's like, okay, fine, I can cut through it. And she basically creates love breathing by using her entire body to swing the sword, which gives her a lot more strength. And it's at this point when Mitsuri figures out how to spin while holding a sword that she has a flashback of Rengoku, where he's telling her that it's the duty of the strong to protect the weak, and that's what his deceased mother told him. And how one day she'll be a swordswoman who can surpass even his skill. What's really impressive about this moment with Rengoku, and it's very symbolic of his character, is that he's talking about more than just her swordsmanship. He's saying, with your heart that loves people and your hair that brings people to you and the way that you deal with those around you, you will bring happiness to those you are protecting. You will serve as a bastion of light in the world of darkness that is a world dominated by demons. And this is something that I feel like a lot of people in the Demon Slayer universe look over. The true darkness and fear that can come from living in a world inhabited by night-crawling immortal beings, and the importance of having people like Mitsuri who bring lightness to that darkness. Smash cut back to Hiro and Rengoku's fight. Rengoku is fast, but not faster than a minigun. He has been shot several times and hit with several explosions, and yet he continues to push towards Hiro, once again striking his neck, but failing to decapitate him. He is leaking from a lot of places, but he's still standing right in front of Hiro, who's starting to wonder whether or not the man standing in front of him right now was the man who he fought before, because that man was a drunk and cut his arms off and made fun of him, but this man is stalwart, quiet, and powerful. And it's that moment that Hiro realizes something. He's out of bullets. And while this is a symbolic moment for both Rengoku and Hiro, it's also a symbolic moment for swordsmanship in general in this era. Hiro obviously opened the fight saying that your sword will never overcome my bullets. And while Rengoku was shot multiple times, Hiro ran out of bullets. And Hiro ran out of bullets before Rengoku ran out of swords or life. You see, Rengoku's iron will is what willed him above technological advancement. And in a sense, that was the sentiment of the Taisho period swordsmen. Swordsmen who brought katanas into World War I. Because while guns did represent the future, the swords represent Japan's heart. A heart or a will that is indomitable. And it's at this point that Hiro pulls out the last thing he has in his shadows, a katana. And as Hiro takes his katana from his shadows, he becomes enveloped by those very shadows, taking on the likeness of a werewolf, and challenges Rengoku to the thing he wanted this whole time, a duel. And as they begin to duel, Rengoku realizes that if any of the shadows encapsulating Hiro touch him, he will die. So Rengoku releases the ninth form, the ultimate form of flame breathing, and he sets his heart ablaze, and with one fell swoop decapitates Hiro. He's won, but he's got 6 bullet wounds, Molotov burns, explosion injuries. And as Hiro is disintegrating behind him, he says,
I can't pass out now. there's still bombs to defuse.
Because this is the will of Rengoku. Even if it looks like the job is done, there is always still people to protect. He is just as willing to have a one-on-one duel with a member of the 12 Kizuki as he is willing to run around defusing bombs, because both protect people. And at this point, as he's falling towards the ground, Mitsuri catches him, and he begins to look up to the sky and tell his mother that he completed his promise. Rengoku and Mitsuri then make their way to the mountain where all of the demon slayers meet, and Kaguya-sama asks him if he wants to step up as a flame pillar now that he has met all the requirements, to which he obviously says yes. And after he accepts this role as the flame pillar, he tells his mother that the flame lit in his heart still burns to this very day, and that he, as the firstborn son of the Rengoku family, will fulfill his duty. And if you look at the two stories that I've just explained about Rengoku's life, a lot of the things about his personality make sense outside of the fact that he's trying to protect the weak. In his two most prevalent fights against demons, at least the ones that we see, these demons use other people as distractions or as food in order to fight demon slayers. The flute demon killed demon slayers and children in order to become one of the 12 Kizuki. Hyro used explosions to make a distraction in order to give him the chance to 1v1 the flame pillar, who he thought was Shinjiro. And this is exactly the opposite of what Rengoku wants. Rengoku wants to protect the weak, so therefore seeing demons use the weak as fodder or as the distraction is inherently something that Rengoku would hate, which gives us insight into something that is very widely discussed in Rengoku's character story. The fact that he wanted to execute Nezuko without a trial. See, some people use this to write off Rengoku's character as a whole. And for the moment, I guess it made sense. But Rengoku's entire life, he has only known demons as the absolute bane of his existence, the thing that the weak needed protection from. So to point at them, especially to point at one brought to the holy place for demon slayer and say, let's just kill it, isn't wild for him. But what's wild for Rengoku is that the Mugen Train arc represents another demon in Rengoku's life who is using the weak, the innocent, the unconscious in order to draw out demon slayers. Well, maybe not specifically to draw out demon slayers in Enmu's case, but to feed their own power. And I know what you might be thinking at this point, well, isn't that what all demons do? And that's not necessarily true. Not all demons focus on capturing large amounts of people or using them as fodder. While all demons do disregard human life, on the scale that Enmu did with the Mugen Train, that's pretty unheard of. So once again, Rengoku was backed into a situation where he had to protect the weak. But it was at this point in time that he was able to spread his own gospel of protecting the weak to the main four. And I'm not going to explain the events of Mugen Train, we've all seen it. But as the duration of Mugen Train goes on and Nezuko eventually emerges from her box and protects the humans on that train, Rengoku has an entire character switch. A character switch endemic of what his core personality is. A person who above all finds those who protect the weak at the cost of their own safety precious. Or as he said in his first ever mission against the flute demon, admirable. Not to sound cliche here, but in a sense, Rengoku has the will of fire from Konoha. The will to carry on the mission to protect those in your village. In seeing that that will of fire exists in those he took under his wing, and specifically in a demon, allowed him to see that Nezuko is a good person and that she's actually working harder than most people to be a good person, because genetically everything is working against her, which made him put Nezuko in very high regard. I mean, the fact that she uses flames couldn't have hurt either. But after the events of like Mugen Train, we get to the Akaza fight, and the Akaza fight is the peak of temptation. Akaza is the strongest enemy Rengoku will ever face, an enemy that a lot of people would crumble in front of and give in to his provocations of becoming a demon. I know I would. Everyone's like,
Kaigaku's the worst. How could he become a demon after he was a demon slayer?
it's like, you'd probably do the same thing to save your own ass. Regardless, Akaza trades blows with Rengoku, and after he gauges Rengoku's strength, he says you should become a demon because Akaza loves fighting strong people, and if Rengoku doesn't become a demon, well, he's gonna die here, and that's the last time Akaza will get to fight him. Akaza talks on about how it would be a waste for Rengoku to die when he's such a talented swordsman. But it's at this point that Rengoku tells Akaza something that I don't think I would be able to find the strength to say myself, but I very much agree with. Rengoku relays the fact to Akaza that what makes human life beautiful is death. Immortality in itself is a curse. If you have forever to do something, you'll never get around to it. The fleetingness and fragility of human life is what makes it worth living. And this rings true with Rengoku's personality. There is a weakness in every human in the form of mortality, and that weakness is what makes life worth protecting and living. He states that whenever death comes, it's not to be feared. In fact, it's to be celebrated. And I think this has largely to do with the fact that he lost his mother at an early time in his life. And because of that, he became comfortable with the concept of death, accepting that her life was beautiful because she died. Rengoku then fights toe-to-toe with upper rank number 3 Demon Akaza. And this is without awakening his Demon Slayer mark. On sheer potential alone, I believe Rengoku could have been the strongest of all the Hashira. But unfortunately, because Rengoku is mortal and Akaza is immortal, eventually wounds start to slow him down. And eventually getting slowed down leads to Akaza making a meme. Just because Rengoku got punched through doesn't mean he was out of the fight, because it was just like his fight against Hyro. A mortal wound doesn't mean you can't keep protecting those around you. And Rengoku learned this on his first mission against the Flute Demon. It's a full circle of life for Rengoku. The first people in his life that he saw as Demon Slayers died with hand signals so that Rengoku or whoever showed up to the scene would understand what the demon's abilities were. Their dying wish, their last act was to protect those around them. So Rengoku used Akaza having his fist inside of him to hold him because the sun was coming up soon. Unfortunately, it's all for naught and Akaza gets away, but this doesn't upset Rengoku. And as he sits there dying with a hole in his chest and cuts all over his body, he doesn't show an ounce of fear or remorse, because he, more than anybody else in his universe, lived his life the way he wanted to. In fact, while he's dying, he relays the information to Tanjiro to go to his family home to look into the Hinokami Kagura. And he tells Tanjiro to tell his little brother Senjiro to follow his own path, and tells Tanjiro to tell Shinjiro, his father, who's been an abusive alcoholic for the majority of Rengoku's life, to keep an eye on himself. Because while Rengoku would be stepping away from the mortal plane, that doesn't mean that he felt his responsibility of protecting those close to him was done. And finally, he tells Tanjiro, now that he had seen Nezuko put her life on the line to protect innocent people, that he accepts her into the Demon Slayer Corps. A man who has dedicated the majority of his life to killing demons changed his entire opinion in one night. Because Rengoku, while very steadfast in his beliefs, was always willing to adapt to situations in both combat and in lifestyle. And then he dies, but he dies with a smile on his face, because till the very end of his life, he was trying to console those around him who may have seemed inconsolable to others. Tanjiro, Inosuke, Zenitsu, Nezuko, all of them were no different to him than the child who he cheered up in Hyro's mission. There is no better way to encapsulate the story of Rengoku than the Mugen Train arc. He used his strength, his will, and his resolve in order to protect those around him, with a smile on his face to comfort those very people. And as he's dying, he sees his mother one last time. And as she's been there in spirit, cheering him on all of this time, making him stronger in his fights against Hyro and Akaza, she finally tells him that she's proud of him and that he's done enough. Because he has done enough. Because Rengoku has shouldered the burden of his entire family, his entire life. What's even more insane is that he went further than that. Becoming the flame pillar puts the weight of the entire nation on your back. Yes, there's pillars like Senebi or Obanai that are insanely powerful, but neither of them ever took into consideration consoling those they're saving. Killing demons is incredible, but helping those who live in fear of these demons or have been persevered by these demons feel better at night because they know somebody with weird hair and a smile is protecting them is just as important as killing them. And that's the true strength of Rengoku. The second morale is lost, the war is done. And because he was so influential in this stance, many people have adopted that as part of their personalities. Tanjiro, Mitsuri, Shinobu, and because of that, he lives on through them. I think Rengoku shows a lot of human characteristics that a lot of people should aim for. Understand that a community is only as strong as its weakest member. Understand that you can believe very firmly in something, but you should always be open to new ideas. And more than anything, lift those up who you can. There's a reason that Rengoku is a crowd favorite amongst Demon Slayer fans, and that's because he represents the best of us. So next time you're at a crossroads, ask yourself, what would Rengoku do? You may find it's more useful than you think. And that's it. That's the life of Rengoku. I hope this little catch up on the life of the most important character, at least to me, in all of Demon Slayer has been informational to you. And if it has, please guys, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you really liked the video and you want to hear more about Demon Slayer or just my life, go ahead and hit that join button and get 3 additional videos from me a month. Life is wanting to be Rengoku and realizing you're Kaigaku.